Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for a presentation on the dead letter office mail handling following the wreck of the Empress of Ireland. This is a ship that sank in 1914, just before the First World War. So it received a lot of interest at the time because it was a Royal Mail ship. There was also a lot of interest by Postmaster General and by the British authorities to see if they could recover some of the mail to demonstrate how great the mail system was at the time. So I got interested in that and put together a short presentation just covering what the various aspects of the accident, the sinking, the recovery effort, and the work of the dead letter office. What you see here is the ship, the Empress of Ireland. It's a picture that was taken in 1912 when it was still doing run between England and Canada. So the presentation outline today covers the early days and a bit of chronology of the ship and some of the key events. I will briefly touch on the shipping route and schedule at the time, because it's an important aspect of postal history. A brief section on collision and sinking. That's the sad part of it. Then the main focus will be on the activities of the divers who worked to recover the mail and how it was treated both on-site and on-site on Rimouski, where it happened, and also at the dead letter office in Ottawa. And a brief summary talking about the rediscovery of the shipwreck that pretty much went dormant for 50 years until it was finally recovered, and the establishment of a memorial to the people who lost their lives in 1914. Chronology of event first. That ship was from the Canadian CPR, Canadian Pacific Railway, and essentially they ordered two ships, namely the Empress of Ireland and the Empress of Britain. The Empress of Ireland was essentially a twin ship to the Empress of Britain. It was launched in January 27, 1906. Its maiden voyage to Quebec City occurred on June 29 to July 7, 1914. The first winter route to St. John, New Brunswick occurred in November 23. Remember that at the time, the St. Lawrence Seaway was not fully ice-free all year, so there was a winter route and a summer route. The winter route essentially was from Liverpool to St. John's, and then or Halifax, and then the mail will be carried by rail all the way to Quebec City for further handling in within Canada. On October 14, 1909, during the 47th crossing of the Atlantic, there was a collision with a submerged object which pierced the hull and flooded two compartments near Matane. And the reason I mentioned that is that very few people are aware of that, but once we look at the schedule of the ship, there was a hiatus of about 4 months where there was no crossing of the ship. That's because they realized when it came to Quebec City that two compartments has been flooded. They avoided a major disaster there, but it was necessary to make some major repair. So the ship has to be sent back to Liverpool for repair. And just to make things worse, the ship reached Quebec City on its own power when they discovered the flooded compartment. But while at the wharf, the very next day, on October 16, the wharf where it was, there was a fire that engulfed the building of the wharf facility, and they have to evacuate. And one of the most hazardous situation was that the Empress of Ireland was again docked at that particular wharf. So they have to, in an emergency, move the ship away so it will escape the major fire. So the ship escaped, and ended up back to Liverpool until February 1910. So there was almost a 4.5 month where the ship was not in operation. It did return in service on February 1910. And then on May 29th, 1914, the ship, during a fog situation near Rimouski, or near Father's Point, which is just a few miles from Rimouski, was hit by a collier, a Norwegian collier called Storstad, and essentially the ship sank in less than 14 minutes, causing the death, causing the lives of 1,012 people. Of those, there was also 450 roughly people who were rescued at the time. But that was the largest single disaster, maritime disaster, besides the Titanic at the time. The recovery effort started in June, which is just about 7 days after the sinking of the ship. And the main reason was to try to recover silver ingots, which were scheduled to be delivered to England, and also make an effort to recover the mail, because, at the time, Canada took a lot of pride into making sure that the handling of its mail system was really secure. So essentially, the rest of the presentation will cover some of those recovery efforts. I just add one more item, which is essentially for the history. The ship remained pretty much forgotten for almost 50 years. Then in 1964, amateur divers just in the area discovered that the ship, they have found the location of the wreck. So amateur divers started to go in and collect various artifacts, mainly glassware, bells, parts of the ship. And eventually, I guess the government decided in 1999 that it would have to establish this as a protected site. And together with the federal government, they established a museum in Father's Point. Father's Point, or Pointe-au-Père, as we say in French, was a key location. That was the location where any ship entering the St. Lawrence River had to change pilot and to be accompanied by river pilots that will embark at Pointe-au-Père and guide the ship all the way to Quebec City. And then same on its way out of the St. Lawrence River, they will embark at Quebec City and disembark at Pointe-au-Père. So this is where the ship is at its closest location to the coast, just about 5 miles from the coast. And there is a relay of pilots that is located at Pointe-au-Père. So that's for the chronology of events. The shipping routes of the ships were, for a long time, they were not very well known. I mean, the actual route were known, but the schedule for those, unlike some of the steamship in the 19th century, were well documented. Like, you got books and books of all the steamships across the world. The one from that period were less documented. So a couple of people, including Derek Grout, who published a book called The Story of an Edwardian Liner, was able to gradually develop a list of a schedule of all the departures and arrival, mostly based on the Lloyd Captain's Register, local newspaper, report of the transatlantic passenger movement. And took me many years to finally find out a schedule of the ships. But this shows that, for example, on that schedule to the bottom right, you see that Campbell, who was the captain of the ship, embarked for his first voyage from Halifax to Liverpool on May 2nd, 2014. So that was his first crossing on board that ship from Halifax to Liverpool. And that was at the time of the year where the ship route will switch from the winter route, going from Halifax, Liverpool, and back, to the summer route, which will be through Quebec City. So his first trip to Quebec City was on May 15th, arrival at Quebec City on May the 5th, and so on May the 22nd, 1914, and departing from Quebec City on the 28th of May, 1914, and the ship is called Incomplete. This is essentially what we're going to talk here. The two maps that I show here show the various routes, like on the what is called the approaching Canada. You could see that sometime it will go through Belle Strait, which is north of Newfoundland here, all the way south of Anticosti, and then follow the south of the coast, because that was the part of the St. Lawrence navigation system that was well marked with various lighthouses, like all the way around here. You could see that they are lighthouses. Or sometime, depending on the ice condition in the North Atlantic, it will follow the southern tip of Newfoundland route before approaching the Gaspé Peninsula all the way to Quebec City. Or in the winter, it will go all the way to Halifax and stop in Halifax and sometime continue to St. John, New Brunswick, because those two ports are ice-free year-round. On the western part, on the UK side, for example, the ship essentially followed between Ireland and England, ended up in Liverpool most of the time. There were a couple of times where it will travel north of Ireland and stop into a couple of terminals, Northern Ireland, to drop mail before carrying on to Liverpool. So that was essentially the normal route of the ship. Next slide is that the normal crossing of a ship at the time was about 6 or 7 days, and it used to carry, on average, 1,000 passengers per crossing. There have been larger one and less and smaller one. There were generally more passengers coming from UK to Canada than coming from Canada to UK, because it was a period of fairly large immigration of people coming to Canada. And obviously the steamship, the Empress of Ireland and the Empress of Britain, were two key ships to essentially help the movement of people to Canada who desperately needed workers essentially to populate Western provinces mostly, and Ontario. One of the learnings from going across this study was that there was not much to do on board the ships. So writing postcard was a very popular and often used to communicate with family and friends. So the representation on the steamship liners were used extensively, and stamps, both Canada and Great Britain stamp, were readily available from the ship. In fact, there is a site that shows the Empress of Ireland postcards. There is over 30 different postcards during a 6-year period of the Empress of Ireland. So there were probably bulk quantities available of postcards. So that means there were a lot of postcards available for the stamp community to essentially look at correspondence that took place on board the ship. For instance, when the inventory of the purse's safe was recovered by the diver on August 22nd, 1922, it shows that inside the purse's safe, there were many sheets of 1 and 2 cents Canadian stamp. Those were Admiral stamp or the Edwardian stamps. And because they were in bad condition, they could not be counted because they had suffered too much water damage. There was a package of insurance stamp for the National Health Insurance for about 37 pounds, and a package of British penny and halfpenny stamp values at about 51 pounds. So considering the number of passengers and the number of stamps there, so obviously postcard use was certainly very active. So the next 3 pages, I'm going to show some of the postcards that were used during the period of 1907 to 1914, all the way to the last hour before the sinking. So the first one, this is a letter from Quebec City to South Dakota. And essentially, when you read the postcard, it shows that, they are now in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Yesterday, they saw 4 icebergs. So a nice testimony as to how the trip was entering the Gulf. And that was about 2 days before the arrival in Quebec City. And that particular one was with a 2 cents Edward. Next one was a ship that were essentially coming to Canada, but that one was, they were using the 1 penny stamps, which many of them were available on board the ship. So that one, for example, indicates that they arrived safely at St. John. So remember, the ship stopped in Halifax, go to St. John. So you got the date here, and the ship, the London postmark. That letter, that postcard, was written aboard the Empress of Ireland, and you see the front of the postcard below that one. There's another one here that I couldn't show all the front and all the back, but a lot of the fronts are very similar. This one is one that is addressed to a passenger in first class and has receiving mark of Canadian Pacific Railway, August 8 at the 1913 pier head, because the Canadian Pacific had a pier head on the wharf at Liverpool. And you could see it shows that the Canada Pacific Railway with the date at Liverpool, which is the where the letter was addressed. And you could see it was addressed to a Mrs. Oban Sense, something like that, first class passenger. So by the Empress of Ireland right here. So again, nice correlation with the ship. The last 2 here are essentially a letter from Montreal to Switzerland via the Empress of Ireland. And as you could see, the company, which is, I guess, Wilker H. Berry of Montreal, sent a letter to Basel, Switzerland, with the steamship Empress of Ireland and a 5 cents Admiral, which was the tariff from Canada to Switzerland. And the back shows the arrival of 14th of January at Basel. So that one obviously had to carry travel from Montreal all the way to Halifax to catch the Empress of Ireland ship in Halifax, because it was in the winter route. So that explained some of the delay in getting that letter to Basel in Switzerland. The other one here is essentially a letter that shows that it was mailed at sea, and it was on March 28, 1913, Paquebot, Halifax. You could see the cancel shows Paquebot, and the timing March 28, 2013, Halifax, and the content of the postcard indicate that it was en route to St. John. Oh, I believe, yeah, I have this one. This is not a postcard that I own. This is a postcard that belonged to Library Archive Canada or to the museum. This was a letter or postcard that was posted at Rimouski on May the 28th. This was written on board. It was sent via the pilot exchange boat, the Lady Evelyn, then went back on train from Rimouski to Quebec City. The postmark is from Lévis. You could see just barely it's upside down under the 1 cent stamp, which is the CPR station south of Quebec City. this one was included as a facsimile postcard for those who purchased the collector's set of 2014 that Canada Post prepared when they celebrated or they commemorated the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the ship. Essentially, what happened is that the last mail pickup or delivery point on the ship was at Rimouski, where the ship people could could board at Quebec City, but there was an opportunity about 12 hours later if they wanted to drop their mail at Rimouski. So the ship carrying the pilot would also bring aboard the mail from that they received by rail to put on the ship, to put on the Empress of Ireland. And also they will pick up a few mail bags that were written on the ship in the last few hours back for delivery across the system. So there was even a nice, I guess, a video that I have here. I will show at the end if people are interested, that shows how it worked. It was essentially the mail office on board the ship will collect any mail that was left to be dropped, and will drop that directly on the ship, waiting for the mail at Rimouski. All that took place on the water. So what happened on May 19th at 1:41 a.m. is that the Empress is hit by the collier Storstad, sinks in 14 minutes. There is a recollection of how the accident occurred. You could see Pointe-au-Père is on the left side, about 5 miles from where it happened on the ship. And you see the map of where, on the red dot, where the accident took place. And here on the side, you had one of the ship, which is in this particular one, the Eureka, which is the ship that is used to carry the pilots and some of the mail to the ship during the pilot transfer. And in the background, this is a picture that was taken in between 1910 and 1912. So that was the main lighthouse of Pointe-au-Père at the time, which was a main one, and you could see where some of the pilots were at the time. Next is that just an example of the damage that was caused. So that was the very next day, the Storstad essentially continued to Quebec City, and then it was seized by the authority in order to conduct the inspection. And the Lady Grey, which was a ship in the area, was asked to help pick up the dead and the people that were dead from the sinking. And the ship was full of coffins that could be assembled, and because Rimouski was a small town at the time, they had to bring it back to Quebec City. So in fact, below here there's a link. I can also show you. This is an interesting thing because it is a high quality video of about 1.5 minutes that shows the arrival of the ship at Quebec City, the disembarkment, and a couple of people. Remember, we're 1914, where there's no television there. There's limited access to electronic material, but there's a nice story about. There is a story about what took place and the essentially the work to remaster the few minutes of documents that are available from that particular event. So when this all said and done, you can see here things were moving very, very quickly. On May 30th, which is the day after, there was immediately a coroner's inquiry that starts at Rimouski. On June the 6th, the Canadian Salvage Association offers to recover the remaining corpses, the silver bar, the safe, and the mail from the wreck. On June 16th, the Commission of Inquiry convened in Quebec City, and this one was presided by Lord Mersey. He was the person in charge of the Commission of Inquiry for the Titanic. So fairly highly knowledgeable person to conduct this inquiry. The commission adjourned on June 27th. Its final report was issued on July 11th. So you can imagine, in just about a month, they were able to conduct all of that. Then August the 4th, Canada declares war to Germany. On August 20th, the Canadian Salvage Association recovers the purser safe and open it in Quebec City in one of the Bank of Montreal office on the 22nd. And they indicated that they were having access to the bags of mail that were accessible for recovery. Here is a telegram. Some of this information is all at Library Archive Canada. This is a telegram from Rimouski on August 22nd, and this is from the Canadian Salvage Association, indicating that they have reached the mailroom of the Empress of Ireland and have today recovered 24 bags of mail, and the large part of which are registered, and they beg to suggest that bags be at once opened on their delivery at Rimouski by their official, and they have been turned the bag to Mr. G.A. Gamache, which was the representative of Canada Post at the time in Rimouski. And then following this, and is one example, but every shipment of bags that was received and was well documented in those documents and signed by Mr. Gamache. So here, for example, September 13th, they received from CSA 24 bags of mail intact. The next document here shows that on the September 18th, 1919, the railway mail service to Quebec City advised that the divers were now no longer able to continue the recovery effort. So they ceased their operation, and I guess, they advised that they sent by ocean liner express 3 bags. So essentially, what they were saying is that the bag of mail were open at Rimouski. The mail was handed off to a dead letter office in Rimouski. The letter were dried at the time before they were shipped, and those shipments were all essentially monitored by the controller at the time at Rimouski and documented when they were shipped back to the dead letter office. So here are a couple of pictures from that period, that activity just as the letter started to be recovered. So the wet mail was received at Rimouski, set to dry prior to forwarding. Large displays prepared, table, walls, clothesline were installed to handle the large volume. Here we're talking thousands of letters. The one on the left show the people in charge of doing this. The one on the right is a picture that was taken by that was taken by Canadian Salvage Association, essentially to demonstrate that they were able to retrieve the mail and get it to a point where it was usable, or at least they could transfer that to the dead letter office for proper handling. What I could not figure out on that one is that, as you notice, about half of the letter still have their stamps on. I could never find one of those letters with the stamp. I'm not sure if eventually in handling the stamp was lost, but most of the recovered letters that are available through the marketplace today do not have a stamp because the stamp floated away. But interesting too is that those letters came from different places. You could clearly read where they were going to or where they were coming from. Like you see, one is to Bath, England, one is to Manchester. That one here is probably from the west route because it's either Korean or Japanese stamp on that letter. So that's those are interesting pictures for those interested in studying that particular matter. Next one is just after the drying of the bag. They were all dispatched to Ottawa dead letter office via train. As I said, each shipment is well documented, and here are some samples. Again, here, for example, Mr. Martineau sent a letter to the Ottawa controller indicating that he's sending 29 registered articles received from the Empress of Ireland. They were dispatched from Rimouski by train number 151. So a lot of detail for people interested in postal history. All of those details are available at Library in Archive Canada. The next one here is that this is another one, a memorandum from the controller to Mr. Gamach, who was also the British mail officer at Rimouski. He represented the British mail there, advisor the dispatch from there to the editor office of 4 more bags of letter that sank. Now, after those letters were sent, I think the editor office took over, and all the recovered letters were clearly identified by the editor office with the mention in the Time Roman font, recovered by divers from the wreck of the steamship Empress of Ireland. It was stamped on back with the editor office or editor office branch oval. It varies. Sometimes both oval are present, sometimes only one is present. So the markings, and I'm going to see that on other covers in the next couple of pages, you could see they do vary a bit. The early ones that were handled, like the one on the left, received a purple stamp recovered by diver from the wreck of the Empress of Ireland. Some of the later one, the one from Chatham on the right, for example, the color is, I would say, teal, or it's probably bluish green, but a teal. And the back of the letter, like the one from the middle, for example, you could see that it was received by the editor office and then by the branch, and they have 2 different color. The first oval is purple, the next one is green. And the same thing happened to the other one. Here is one that was to the London Glove Company that came from Berwick, Nova Scotia. And that one, what is particular about that one is that a couple of annotation has been made. And essentially, this is typical of a money order. And it shows money order $4.10. So there were a lot of money orders letter at the time. So you got the date here. You got a very clear recovered by the divers and a very clear branch dead letter office stamp of September 25th, 1914 on that particular one. Others have different colors. That one here has a dead letter office color, which is more lighter purple. And again, the recovery diver is in teal. Finally, that particular one is interesting because generally most covered were sent back to the sender. Some letters were sent to the receiver, and in this case they were using what they call a ambulance letter. Yeah, the ambulance cover is a cover from the letter office into which they will insert the article that they recover. So here you got a full complement of the letter addressed to Miss Peely in, I guess, Norborough Road in Leicester. The back cover shows essentially the date that it was stamped, received by the letter office. That cover was put into an ambulance and sent back to Mr. Wilfley, which is the person that sent that letter initially. And that one is of particular interest to me because it shows, for example, that it was sent free because it was a government sending a letter within Canada, so there was no fee to send that from the letter office to the sender in Victoria. And then somebody wrote in 1914, for example, enclosed letter was essentially recovered by the divers from the Empress. So there was a documentation, somebody wrote at the time exactly what this thing was about. And know the particular date. This was made in Ottawa on December 24th, 1914. So those are fairly difficult to obtain. In 10 years, I saw only 2 or 3 of those ambulance letters. They are available, but they are quite scarce. Here's another one. This one essentially was issued, was a cover from Rimouski, Saskatchewan. It's hard to read, but that's a town that is just a southwest corner, or it's a part of Regina nowadays. And you see that one, it showed the mention value. That means when they look at that letter, it probably was a money letter or contained some money. That may explain why, instead of sending it to the sender, they decided to send that to the addressee. So the marking applied to by the dead letter office on the 2-cent annual stamp, and the recovered is in deep blue in this case here. And you look at the receiver is in the deep purple. What is interesting here is that because that ambulance cover was sent to England, you see, if you look here, it's in England, so they could not use the the privilege, so they had to put a stamp. So they put the 2 cents letter rate that was in place at the time to send that letter to Mrs. Sentence in England. So in terms of handling, I mean, there were summaries put together of how well the deed office did. There are very detailed inventory of almost every correspondence that was received. So the inventory of mail bag on board the Empress of Ireland, the number of mail bag recovered, the log of mail containing valuable, it's all available. On October 19th, 2014, it showed the source of 169 bags. I think if you look carefully on this one, I'm not going to try to expand that, but it shows a total of 169 bags of letter, including 30 from the foreign trans-Pacific mail. Of those 176 bags received at the time, only 45 contained letter matter. The rest were either empty or contained newspaper, because there was the bulk of the content of the material that we're able to recover was newspaper, and essentially they were not reusable. So most of that was disposed of right on site at Rimouski. There were also 32 parcel posts on board the ship, but none were recovered. There were, in fact, some correspondence back and forth between people from the UK and the post office in Canada looking for parcel post, because there were rumors that parcel posts have been recovered, but in fact, none of them were recovered by the divers. So the total item recovered containing valuable was 1,438 letters with a recorded value of $90,000. And here is a sample, for example, of what they were. They were $8,000 of money letter, $788 of money, draft bank $38,000, bill of exchange, a promissory note, and check. So that's how careful and how well and how thorough the dead letter office managed all the mail from that particular event. Here is that when the item were itemized, here are the instruction that had been given to all the people involved into handling that mail, and you could see every single item with the name of the person, the address, the content, if any, the amount that was contained in the letter. Every item that had value connected to it was essentially included in records, and all those records are still there with the actual address of the people. This by itself is probably a study by its own. This letter on the left here just deal with some of the record keeping the instruction that were followed, indicating that the complete record has been kept of all these letters. The DLO, for example, in treating these mail matter in the customary way, has been keeping in close touch with the inquiry office, so that all inquiry have reached the department in regard to the mail. Like, they're facing few correspondence from people expecting mail, and each of them was handled individually, and they went to a great extent to ensure customer satisfaction in that. Finally, on September 13th, they essentially stopped the activity because the diver could no longer retain the mail. So as a conclusion, the superintendent issued the following memo on January 3rd, January 20th. Essentially, it says that I beg to inform you, and he was writing to the post office department, I believe, Mr. Webster, which was the assistant post office general at the time, indicating that all mail matter which was recovered from the wreck of the Empress has been disposed of. The last item have been sent out from this office on the 13th instant, which was January 13th. This mail matter was returned to the sender when it was found possible to do so, but in case it would not be returned to the sender, it was forwarded to the addressee. So that's essentially the procedures put in place by the editor office and how they followed their instruction. So here's my final conclusion now is that with the Great War underway, this major Canadian disaster was, I said gradually, but very rapidly forgotten. Remember that all the focus switched to the war effort in the middle of the inquiry, just a few days after the inquiry started and the conclusion were reached. And it remained such for over 50 years. In 1964, a group of amateur divers rediscovered the wreck location near Pointe-au-Père. The site has been explored, marked, and modern museum established. Here is the buoy that is now on just above on the sea, just above the rest of the wreck in Pointe-au-Père. So this is essentially now a protected historic site by the federal government, and on the river they established an important museum. Again, and if anybody happened to be in the area of Rimouski, which is essentially 180 miles from Quebec City, pretty much at the end of the Highway 20, it is definitely worth going and visiting this museum. They have a lot of artifacts from the wreck. They also have interactive video, and it's really an interesting part of our history that is worth remembering. Just to mention, when I made that presentation, that was just 1 week before the May 29, 2024. So there was a special commemoration that was organized. Most of the celebration took place over a period of May 29 to June 2, 2024. Many of the activities were sold out, and that was a nice way to recognize and commemorate the 110th anniversary of this disaster. The museum offers many interactive displays and is open to the public from early May till mid-October. So again, it's worth to go and take time to visit this. So I'd just like to thank Library and Archive Canada to allow the viewing and picture taking of their document. I've got about 180 document pictures from the records there. Also, David St. Pierre, who is an historian that have written many books and has an outstanding collection of pictures from the time taken by the divers team at the time of the recovery effort, and also provided valuable reference in helping me to complete that presentation.